Nice. Top 10% realtors in her market. This is Sarah Daniels, of course. We are talking real estate, but in particular this morning, we're talking about property assessments and why we're so crazy for them.
Boy, do people freak out about property assessments. It's like the golden, I don't know, the holy grail of apparently property values. And you know what? It has very, very little, in fact, to do with the actual value of your property. A property assessment is based basically on the government's take on the values of property within an area. So you could have a property that is worth $750,000 according to the city, but they may be unaware of all the upgrades that you've done inside. That property could be actually worth $900,000. The real value of your property is going to be based on comparables in the real estate market, not the actual assessment. So that's something to keep in mind. So people get really nutty though. They get their property assessments like, oh my God, it's gone down, it's got down. What does this mean? What does this mean? Generally, it means very little. The property assessment is used for taxes, and so according to that assessment, the taxable value of that property is what you're going to be taxed on, and there is a mill rate. And a mill rate is what the city sets along with the municipal government, TransLink, etc. It's a percentage of per $1,000 assessed, taxable assessed, that you will be paying in taxes. That mill rate adjusts every single year. Some years it goes high, some years it goes a little bit lower, but it's what determines what your taxes are.
So given the mention of the comparables, like you just said, to drive the true market value of your place, when could the property assessment be used as leverage for either a buyer or a seller?
Well, for a seller, I mean, a lot of the times, you know, if their property is assessed high, you know, it's the mentality that goes along with it too. If your property is assessed high, you actually think that that's the actual value of it. Sometimes in sellers' minds, that can actually be a detriment, because if you have in fact not done the upgrades in your neighborhood, and you're in a neighborhood of $1 million homes, and you've not done anything to your property in 20 years, you haven't changed the roof, the hot water tank's on its last legs, the kitchen's from the 80s, your property is probably not going to get that $1 million that you're hoping if everybody else has done the upgrades. So for sellers, often it is they'll think, especially if they've not been involved in the real estate market for many years, if they haven't bought or sold, they'll think that is the true intrinsic value of their property. It's not. Same thing with buyers. Buyers will, and we get this a lot with overseas buyers, they look at the assessment and they believe that that is the be-all and end-all property value for that property. So often an assessment might be low, especially if that property hasn't changed hands in 15, 20 years. They may have done the upgrades and everything, but the assessment may not reflect its true market value. You've also got to remember that though the assessments came out January the 1st, it's actually based on the value according to the city, based on what their usages are as of July the 1st. So when you're looking at a property assessment to make a purchase and trying to use that as a valid you know, way of making comparisons towards the end of this year, well, that assessment is based from July of 2014. The relevance for property value in November of this year is none. The market could be down, the market could be up.
And
so,
you could have, there are varying assessments, right? There's the bank assessment, an independent assessment, and this government assessment.
Yeah, and bank assessments, again, I mean, banks use their own criteria. They send out appraisers, and appraisers, again, their job is they look at things very, you know, in a very blank slate kind of way. But realtors are usually, and I mean, you know, obviously I'm a realtor, I gotta say this, it seems like, but realtors are really the best basis of figuring out the value of your home. They have access to all the recent sales. They know what's out on the market. If you're dealing with a realtor who is familiar with your neighborhood, they're gonna be able to give you a much more accurate picture of what your home is worth. So you really shouldn't be looking at that assessment as the market value of your property, nor should you be looking necessarily at a bank appraiser. A bank usually comes in to do an appraisal after the purchase of a property to make sure that the value that you are offering, that you have been accepted at, is correct in the sense that they're not going to finance something. If this is where it all really started. If you're offering $1.3 million for a property and really the true value is $800,000, and you're looking for $1 million mortgage, the bank is not going to give you that $1 million mortgage based on the value of the property. So that's what a bank appraiser really does, is make sure that the value attached to the purchase is going to be valid for their financing.
And quick note, if you are a homeowner and you see that property assessment higher, you don't want to pay lower property tax, how complicated is the appeal? You've got
until February the 2nd to make an appeal. There have been many successful appeals, you know, especially in areas that are in great transition. You can go and prove, you know, that you in fact haven't done the upgrades. There was a neighborhood in White Rock, for instance, who saw their appraisals, property assessments rather, go up exponentially because the city figured out they were on view properties. So they figured that that extra value, that intrinsic value, would bump them up. Some people were able to successfully argue that their assessment was too high and bring them down. But don't get too much caught up on the assessment. Really, it's how you're going to be taxed. And if it's high, yeah, you definitely should do something about it.
Interesting stuff. We always go to the one who knows when it comes to real estate. Sarah Daniels, thanks for being here. Great follow on Twitter. Sarah, it's
Sarah Daniels.
Sarah Daniels.
In case I forget who I am, it's Sarah Daniels.
That's what people say to you at Starbucks. It's Sarah Daniels.
And I turn around and go, where?
Where?
What happened?
Great info, though. Great
Awesome
info.
Stuff.